May the 4th has come and gone for another year, and whilst most of the fun from a galaxy far, far away tends to be away from gaming during that time, us C64 fans got a nice surprise this year in the form of MegaStyle's adaptation of the iconic Atari 2600 Empire Strikes Back game originally published by Parker Brothers. But as I sat down to load it up, the one question which was at the back of my mind was, of course, just how well does it take those mechanics of the Atari 2600 game and see if there was more to it than just some fancier visuals. So, let's quickly revisit the Atari original, just so we know what we're working with here. Released in 1982, The Empire Strikes Back focuses on the main action sequence of that movie, the Battle of Hoth, in which the rebels are forced to provide cover as they retreat in the face of an Imperial attack. Your goal is to hold the line as long as possible by taking out the advancing AT-AT walkers and prevent them from taking out the generators situated at the far right of the playfield. Taking them down requires a lot of patience, with plenty of hits needed to punch through their armour, or if you're lucky, a shot into a temporary weak spot which opens up, indicated with a flashing square, can take them out with a single shot. Your snowspeeder can take only a few hits before being destroyed, but with some careful piloting, you can land in the lowest area of the screen to get repairs. This can only be performed a limited number of times on each life, so you're going to need to save it for when you're most critically damaged. The game has no levels as such, as the Imperial assault is relentless, offering no breaks as you take out those walkers, with more being resupplied as you do. In a way, it perfectly fits the vibe of early Atari 2600 games, where it offers a constant challenge between you and the wood-grained beast until the point where the game eventually outplays you and you're done for. And now we've taken a look there, let's get to the main reason you're watching this video, and finally dive into the Commodore 64 adaptation. Right away, we're treated to some lovely presentation here, channeling the vibes of the movies and their opening title sequences quite well. The first big change to the gameplay is in its structure. Instead of facing a continual assault from those walkers, this C64 version is played out over 8 distinct levels. These alternate between ones which involve taking on a wave of AT-AT walkers, and ones which pit you up against the smaller AT-ST walkers. In principle, this is a neat way to expand the gameplay, as having differing enemies does mix things up a bit. Though, I kinda wish the levels weren't just focused on a single enemy type, as having multiple varieties to fight through could have shown a much greater sense of progress as you play through the game. What could also have helped is having the ATSTs require a slightly different strategy to take them out. Essentially, you're just lining up and blasting them with your Snowspeeder's blasters. The only real difference between them and the AT-ATs is that they take fewer shots. Though of course, whilst they're vulnerable at any point, the AT-ATs could really only be effectively taken out by shooting them head on. Now, supposedly the mechanic with the weak spot is meant to be here, but if it was, it wasn't visually apparent. So, yeah, no shortcuts for me in taking them down. In a way, this C64 version is actually closer to Lana Soft's original Attack of the Mutant Camels. And that of course is kind of funny because, at least in a sense of reverse inspiration, the original game, Attack of the Mutant Camels, was actually inspired by that Atari original version. But changing things up so that rather than having an endless onslaught, you have waves with a fixed number of enemies to defeat. Now this change also makes the late game feel a bit lacking to me because there doesn't really seem to be much of a progressive challenge. Each wave seems to offer what feels like the same number of walkers to take out, and they don't really get any more challenging to deal with either. Again, you contrast that with Attack of the Mutant Camels, as you work your way through that game, the bullets and their attacks from the camels become far more relentless. So you've really got to be much quicker with your reactions to survive and get further on. As well, the level structure kind of makes me pine for the likes of Shadows of the Empire, if only because its opening Hoth stage demonstrated that progression of challenge excellently. From initially having to deal with waves of probe droids, before tackling AT-ST walkers, and finally, the main threat of the AT-ATs themselves joining the fray. The challenge slowly ramps up as each type is added, and the result is that you'll certainly need to be on your toes as you work out how to prioritise the mix of enemies in each wave. It truly adds to the scope of the Empire's invasion, making things that bit more desperate as time goes on. Which contrasts with this Commodore 64 adaptation, because the real threat here comes from the bullets more than anything. This isn't down to a matter of intensity, or a matter of mastering complex patterns, but more a matter of visibility. Which is down to two things in particular: the size and their colour. On their own, neither of these would be particularly irritating. But together, it's a gestalt of pain, which kind of prevented me from really getting into that zone of flow. The bullets are set up to appear using the same multicolour colours as the walkers themselves use, which is fine in principle, at least from a technical angle, but it means that colour-wise, they don't stand out from the backgrounds. Something which doubly hurts thanks to the more detailed designs employed here. If we go back to the 2600 original, the flat backgrounds work wonders for helping ensure there's enough contrast between the bullets and the backgrounds, especially as they're colour matched to the walker's current colour, a byproduct of how things are managed on the 2600 hardware. In terms of sizing, well, they're small, which means if you're playing at a distance, like I am, at least in my living room setup, the innate nature of analog video means that they're going to blend in a bit better to the backgrounds because of the limited colour contrast. Now, I'm sure someone here is just going to say emulate, but, well, that's not really how things go here. An example of how both these factors could have been mitigated is with the Attack of the Mutant Camels 2 sub-game Lamasoft created as part of Battle X. The bullets here aren't just your traditional circular or square blobs, but rather an animated object which both rotates and cycles through colours. In fact, it cycles through enough colours that it contrasts incredibly well with the game's backgrounds, which, gotta say, is rather important when you're working to avoid an onslaught of enemy bullets, as you'd expect from the finest of Minter traditions. Hence, it's why I find myself finding this had a bigger impact on me than perhaps it should have. It's certainly how I felt when having my first play of it, and the visibility of the bullets and getting used to their patterns did end my run quite quickly. Coming back for a second pass, which is the run I did actually record footage of here, things certainly felt much better, and honestly I did manage to develop a strategy for surviving the enemy attacks. Something I really appreciate is how your snowspeeder can take more hits before exploding, rather than a few on the original game. So that also does help mitigate some of the challenges of learning the bullets. This also is helped by having it fully be repaired between stages. Now it does come at losing the ability to repair during a stage, so it's a case of swings and roundabouts, at least when you're getting started. More than anything, that's kind of what the Empire Strikes Back C64 is for me. It takes the core concepts of that Atari original game and adds some impressive presentation to it. In fact, all up, the visual and audio elements go a long way to conveying the atmosphere of the movie. So whilst I appreciate the effort taken to deviate from the original game and add on to it, these additions in the form of the additional enemy types and the new level structure kind of take away the tension and dread of the original game for me. And I know what you're thinking. Dread? In an Atari game? But seriously, there's a way that the walkers approach here that really adds to that over time. And of course, I've got to say, despite that, this is a game which is still worth trying out. Even if it means it's one you fire up every now and then. Who knows, maybe it's something you'll do on the 4th next year. All up, when you do take a classic game and try to port it over to a new platform, you've got two outcomes you could aim for. The first is simply to just do a straightforward as port as possible, maybe with a minimum of enhancements to make it a little more visually appealing, but taking a purist approach to how things are handled with the mechanics and gameplay. The second is about going all out, to take that original game, to build upon it and create something which uses capabilities of the new platform to offer a mixture of the old and the new. You can see from this that this is what I feel MegaStyle have tried to do here. But it's just, I kinda wish it went further than it actually did. If you haven't already tried it out, this is still a fine slice of action, especially if you've never really played that original Atari 2600 game. And if you have, consider it a way which lets you actually earn a happy ending here, something we all kind of need in space year 2022. And so with that, I think it's time to bring this one to a close, at least in the usual way. So if you enjoyed the episode, do click the thumbs up. Trust me, it really helps out. If you're someone who's after more thoughtful looks at interesting games across a variety of classic micros and consoles, why not consider subscribing and, doing the bell thing, so you can be notified as new episodes go out. If you find the show informative, enlightening, or something which has pointed you towards some interesting titles to try out, consider supporting over on Patreon. It helps, carve out some time to put effort into this and keep it standing afloat in a sea of small, hard works. The links are below. And now, there's really nothing more for me to say than to thank you very much for watching.